They say every mountain keeps an echo of what it's heard, but some echoes never fade. They wait, waiting for a voice familiar enough to wake them. My name is Caleb Rivers, former field signal officer. I came north looking for silence and found a map that listens back. Not a map of roads or river, but of voices buried under ice. Tonight, you'll hear what the mountain remembers. This is the Hollow Map. The wind slapped my face like a cold hand. The service road up Black Ridge was a sheet of new ice, dull gray like old metal. I killed the truck's engine, and the volley went quiet, only the hiss of wind through black pine. In the passenger seat, Coda lifted his head. The scar on his left ear caught the last flat light. He didn't bark. He didn't need to. We were where we were supposed to be. I took the cracked leather pouch from the glove box. Inside lay my father's map, the one he never explained and never threw away. The fold lines were brittle, and the paper smelled like old books and rain. Under UV light, the ink would bloom, then fade, leaving a white void dead center in the woods. No roads, no contour lines, just a hollow shaped vaguely like a heart. My father had called it simply the Hollow. I zipped my jacket, opened the door, and let the cold move through me the way a first drink moves through a dry man. Coda hopped down, front pads feather light on the ice. He lowered his nose, tasted the air, and gave that tiny lick he does right before he goes to work. We moved off the road and into the timber. Ice snapped under my boots. Somewhere down in a wind hole, a frozen stream cracked and popped, like someone plucking a broken guitar. Coda froze, pivoted, and raked his forepaw through a drift. I knelt beside him. Beneath a skin of clear ice glinted metal. I chipped away with a folding shovel. Red paint came up in scales. A round steel plate surfaced, riveted at the rim, big as a well cover. Near the lower edge, half buried and frostbitten, were stamped words: Post 23, service, route closed, 1952. 1952, the year my father enlisted. I found the lift socket, got my fingers under, and heaved. The hatch shrugged up a fraction and breathed out a long-kept cold. Oil, damp paper, old summer smoke. Coda stepped back, then forward again until his nose touched the rim. He murmured once. I clicked my flashlight on and knifed a narrow blade of light down a ladder into black. Down we go, partner, I said. The ladder croaked in the throat of the earth. The air thinned until even my breath sounded like it was wrapped in cloth. At the 16th rung, I stopped and listened. Under the silence was a sound so small it might have been imagined, a breath that wasn't mine. I cut the beam across the wall. Troweled concrete, soot, and ink, not paint. Ink, black and matte, laid in wide swipes like an exhausted hand had dragged a brush until there was nothing left. Coda took point when my hesitating mind wouldn't. The passage was horseshoe-shaped and just tall enough for a man and a dog. Old chalk notations flaked off the walls as we moved. A bundle of cables ran in a neat spine along the ceiling, enough to mean somebody once had powered a private world. I pulled a little shortwave rig from my pack, a mutt of scavenged parts my father taught me to solder when I was 15. When everything goes quiet, Caleb, he used to say, dead frequency is just yesterday waiting to be heard. I thumbed it alive. Static like dry snow hissed. I swung the dial slow. At 1430 kHz, a click stepped out of the noise, then something like wind inside a pipe. For half a second, a human vowel rose and drowned again. I killed the radio and kept moving. The ink along the walls thickened into lines, lines into writing, writing into layers and layers of hands on top of one another, coordinates, dates, names, One set of initials stopped me cold, HN, my father's. Beside it, in a hurried, breaking hand, second route welded, Lockett Station. I did what I shouldn't. I put my palm on the ink. Warmth returned to it like sleep leaving. The surface softened, slicked, and drank the heat out of my skin. Under the thinning black, a hand-shaped recess appeared, sized for a man. I set my palm inside. Something clicked behind the wall. Miles away and 2 inches from my fingers, Coda swung his head back the way we'd come and made a sound I'd only heard twice, a low beehive growl that doesn't mean fear, it means attention. A single tremor feathered through the hallway like a stone dropped into a deep well. Somewhere ahead, a door sighed, and a thread of old light woke up and went out again. We made for it. A steel leaf hung half ajar on weeping hinges. We slid through into a navigation room the time had backed away from, banks of analog switches, a radio with vacuum tubes slumped in their sockets, and a great round disc that took up half the far wall. It wasn't a map of land. It wasn't a star chart either. It was a grid of angles and numbers arranged around a missing core, a socket with nothing in it. On a workbench sat a small steel box wedged under a table leg, a simple wolf etched on the lid. I worked the rusted clasp with the tip of my knife. Inside was a black and white photograph. 3 men, filthy and smiling, standing at the lip of a shaft. A German shepherd at their boots, silver light in the sun, a neat scar on the left ear. On the back in fountain pen, Unit 23, K9, mission never finished. Coda put his nose near the photo and didn't lick it. Respect is a word we give dogs to explain something they already know. I checked the dead radio. Chewed wires, tubes sleeping. I reseated one, scrubbed dust off with my sleeve, fed it from a pocket battery I'd brought and flipped the toggle. It took a breath, then coughed white static. I eased the dial. In the storm, there was a small, stubborn sound, tap, like a ring knocking wood. Very specific, very here. Anyone copy? I said, surprised by the hush in my own voice. The speaker exhaled something. The next sound was hardly a word. It could have been a trick of mind, but it had a shape my bones recognized, a way of dragging vowels I had grown up with. My father's cadence, aged, thinned, but there. I put my hand flat on the big round disc. The engraved numbers gleamed under dust. The empty core, dark as a pupil, watched me back. The door creaked for no wind. Coda didn't bark. He angled his ears toward it and waited for my head to catch up with his senses. One more syllable lifted out of static like a fish turns in black water. On. Then broken bits. If someone finds this, 3rd route. Don't lock it again. My chest hurt, and it wasn't the cold. I lit the little storm lantern from my pack. The room breathed back at me. Coda leaned his weight against my shin. I wrote on the bench with a carpenter's pencil, the way men I never met had written here. Entered post 23, 1842, heart plus Coda, continuing. The speaker whispered again, clearer this time. Son, don't be afraid of the dark. The light is always in your hand. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, the empty heart of the disc seemed larger. It wasn't a hole anymore, it was a promise. We'll find the rest, I said. And Coda and I left the sleeping room behind and went deeper, where paper maps lie and hollows know the way. The hatch sealed behind us with a tired sigh, like a lung exhaling the last warm air it had saved for 30 winters. My light dragged a pale ribbon across concrete. Dust lifted and danced, slow as snow in a church. Coda patted at my heel, claws ticking on the grates, breath steady. one warm, living metronome in the machine's cold heart. The circular table in the nav room still hummed, the faint glow of contour lines pulsing like veins under skin. The center remained a dark pupil, unblinking. "We go down," my father's voice had said. "Not out, not back, down." "Stay close," I told Coda. He didn't glance up, just adjusted his pace so our shadows overlapped. The stairwell spiraled from the far side of the chamber, narrow and nervous, built for men who didn't want to be seen. At the first landing, a painted arrow flaked from the wall. "Listening gallery." Farther, the stencil changed tone. "Seismic core. Authorized personnel only." I brushed the words with my glove as if a touch could make them honest again. The temperature dropped. Crystals rhymed the conduit lines like moss that had learned how to winter. We descended 3 flights, turned into a lateral corridor, and stepped into a hall that felt wrong even before I knew why. Sound dies in some rooms. It doesn't bounce back. It just drinks you. This was one of those rooms. The flashlight beam touched a wall of black glass windows, thick panes looking into long dark spaces with raised platforms, headphone sets with cracked leather cups hung on pegs like old horns, brass placards beneath the windows named each bay Glacier Neck, Blackwater Fault, Ridgeside, Lowtown, listening stations, a theater that showed a film you could only hear. I set my hand on one pane. Cold bled through. Nothing moved inside. The platforms were bare as snow. Coda sniffed along the baseboard. Then the air. Nose answering questions I didn't know how to ask. Somewhere deep in the cement, I felt a tremor. Not shake, but tone that thrummed along my palm. I lifted my light. The tiny dust motes right in front of the glass rippled as if they shared a secret wind. I took a set of headphones from a peg, coaxed the braided cable into a terminal jack, and turned the gain with thumb and forefinger until the knob squealed. No hiss, no white noise. The speakers in my ears gave me the mountain. Low, cavern-deep vowels that rose and fell without ever breaking into consonants. Sometimes the tone swelled so slowly it felt like a tide. Sometimes it dropped away and all that remained was a bead of silence bright as a star. I'd lived long enough up here to know the difference between wind hitched to stone and something else. This was else. Coda's ear flicked. He stepped to the next bay, to Blackwater Fault, and sat, back straight. Facing the glass like a soldier takes a doorway, he let out a breath and fogged the pane, then leaned in until the fog was a circle around his nose and nothing else. Through the headphones, a new artifact, 3 knocks far apart, then nothing, then 3 more. Not SOS, not the clean da-da-da-da-da-da-da I'd learned to spin at 16, but something's pattern. Rhythm bends when it travels through miles of rock. "Copy that," I whispered, because it felt right to answer, even if answering was the smallest magic. A dim light on the mimic panel behind the bay blinked alive. One little glass jewel glowed amber under activity. Another under uplink tried to wake. Failed. Tried again. I traced the wire trunk from the panel to the floor conduit and then back up toward the nav room. If I could route power to bring this gallery from sepia to color, maybe the hollow would show more than its hungry center. The corridors continued deeper past the listening bays. At Postal Calm, we found a narrow shaft with steel pigeonholes and a waist-high table worn smooth by hands. I pulled a drawer. Empty but for a pencil stub and the smell of machine oil and tea. On the wall, a mechanic's calendar from 1954 curled away from its nail, a woman smiling at a horizon she'd never get to. A mail tube clanked faintly when I brushed the lower pigeonhole. Coda's nails clicked as he pivoted, interest switching on like a lamp. I reached in and found a cylinder wedged behind the slot, stamped U-23 under a layer of dust. The cap thread fought me, then surrendered. Inside onion skin paper and my father's handwriting, they ordered a blind, told us to kill the ears, flood the pits, weld the doors. We didn't. The map hears before the mountain speaks. If we listen, we'll have 20 minutes, maybe more. That's the difference between a story and a body count. M. Rivers. The ink blurred where some ordinary day's sweat had run down his wrist. He hadn't shaken his hand dry before writing. He was always like that. Would rather stain a page than waste a second. A second tube, jammed tight, yielded to a careful curse, not a letter. A key, long and ugly, teeth filed by hand, with Postmaster stamped into the stem. A tag of wax thread identified a place. North Slope Shack. Ask for old mail. On the tag's reverse, a smaller note. If I'm not there, I'm under. People forget that under is a place with its own weather. I slid both into my inner pocket where things mattered more. We navigated a few more bends, stepped across a floor drain that breathed cold air up from God knows where, and reached a door painted with A and the letters, Field Power. The handle was on a chain. I eased it down. Hinges gasped. Inside, in a low, damp chamber, the mountain had been stitched with iron, rows of metal rods thrusted from bedrock, heads capped with threaded terminals, all linked by wires now the color of dried rivers. Salt efflorescence furred everything white. Lightning Farm, the old engineers had called these arrays. Invite the sky in, make it work for you. The bank's far wall held a rust-bitten panel with sockets that matched the cabling back in the nav room. I pulled a roll of copper lead and 2 crocodile clips from my pack. Make me honest, I told the rig the way my father did with bulky machines. Coda sat in the doorway and watched the haul. Clip to rod A. Clip to rod B. Stabilizer inline. The little LED on my pack-borne inverter blinked, argued, and settled at 11.1 Nova V. Good dog, I told nobody and everybody. Back to the nav room we threaded following my line markers. The circular table looked less like furniture now and more like a patient waiting for its heart to be convinced. I fed the cord through an access throat, found a terminal box, and made the mountain shake hands with the board. The hum deepened. Indicator lamps along the table's rim winked awake. A comet of red lights whipped clockwise, slowed, and stopped. The center, the hollow, stayed dark. My fingers found a lever labeled Align. I pulled. Under my palms, gears tripped. The disc turned a quarter, then another, a dignified old gramophone brought to life. The wall speakers crackled, not words. A wavering tone that carried shape if not meaning. It reminded me of how a name sounds through water. Then, Caleb. It wasn't the ghost of a cassette. It was a live root. The gallery feeding this room, shaping the knock and tremor into a crude voice that used everything it could find to make sense. I swallowed. I'm here, I said, because you say I'm here to the living, and I wanted to pick a side. Coda was already moving. He nudged my leg, then trotted to the far edge of the room, pressed his muzzle against a seam in the floor I'd taken for a design flourish, and whined. The seam held a panel with finger indents worn soft by decades. I set my hands, pushed. The plate slid heavy and sure, revealing a ladder into black. Cold rushed up and touched my teeth. We descended. The world's heart beat louder with each rung. At the bottom, my light poured into a chamber so small it felt private. A pedestal stood in the middle, waist-high steel, top-carved to cradle something round, empty. The cable bundles that fed the listening rooms gathered here like roots in a socket, Labels etched into the pedestal's rim had grimed into illegibility. I spit, wiped, and coaxed letters out of time. Core, disk, return. A hand-painted arrow pointed back up. A second arrow pointed deeper into a pipe barely wide enough for my shoulders, its mouth framed in concrete like a throat cut into rock. In the pipe, the air changed. It tasted like pennies and storms. I crawled, elbows finding a rhythm, Coda's nails whispering behind. The space kinked twice, fell once. We slid the last short stretch and spilled into a tunnel awake with water. A black ribbon river flowed by our knees, fast without noise. On the far wall gleamed metal heads of rods, the lightning farm's other end. A fat junction can perch like a limpet, wires bundled and tightened into it. Miraculously tidy after all this. Time. Beneath the junction, a square hole had been cut into the wall and capped with tarred wood. There, I breathed. Coda instantly saw the same there, because seeing is a kind of pack work. He dropped into a crouch. I looped my hip line to a rusted anchor, checked it twice, and stepped into the river. Cold hurt until it numbed. One hand on the wall, one moving the light, I shuffled sideways to the cap. Tar crumbled under my knife. The lid came up an inch, then two. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, heavy, right size, sat a metal core the color of old pewter, stamped with U-23 and a serial that made my chest ache. The river lifted, a warning, as if the mountain had inhaled. 20 extra pounds in slick boots are a bad romance. I tucked the core under my parka and turned and slid, and the world tilted. And Coda's line went hard. He planted all lungs and legs, and I hit the ledge ribs first instead of disappearing. I lay there, teeth ringing, hugging the parcel like a thief hugs repentance, and laughed once stupidly. Coda leaned his forehead into mine, his old ritual before we cross a street, and in that touch lived 1,000 miles of road. We got back the way we'd come, slower, synchronized. I could feel the mountain's attention on us. That's what living landscapes do when you move the pieces they've swallowed. They notice, up through the throat, into the pedestal room, up the ladder to the nav chamber again. Lamp glow, console lights, the round disc like a silver moon brought indoors. I set the core into the cradle at the table's heart. It seated with a neat, smug click that made me more grateful than any prayer I'd ever missaid. The lights around the circumference came full and happened to themselves, circuits completing the way a sentence finally finds its verb. A shallow vibration ran up my forearms into my jaw. The hollow wasn't hollow now. It was a drumhead tight and tuned. The gallery bays above and behind us answered. One after another, their amber activity lights kindled. Uplink found its courage and went green. The headphones in the dark sang to nobody. The speaker gave me the mountain in the voice of a man I loved. Wind shifts 37. Blackwater rising. Ridge ice fractures propagate east. 23 minutes. 23 minutes. Not much. The difference between a story and a number on the back of a jacket. I looked at Coda. Even in this murky light, his pupils were wide and black as the core had been. His chest rose and fell like he was reading what the room was saying and translating it back into a language made of being alive. "We don't lock it," I said. "We call." A metal rotary phone hung dead on the wall, the kind with a leather cradle and braided line. Its dial tone would never come back. But in the comm alcove, I'd seen a manifold of lines, some labeled town, some ranger, some weather. A salvageable network might still run between old poles and new gear if the project had been killed from above. The men underneath might have left themselves a way to be disobedient later. I yanked open a junction box on the main console, clipped my pack inverter into a bus, and jerry-rigged a line out to my field radio. I tuned to a frequency the Rangers used at noon in summer when they were bored and liked to pretend the mountain was a CB truck stop. Lowtown Station, this is Post 23, I said, because I didn't know what else to call myself. If anyone's monitoring, you have a rising event on Blackwater within 2-3 minutes. Move the kids from the ball field. Wake the diner. I repeat, static. Then faint, a woman's voice. I don't know who this is, but if this is Randy playing games, I swear, this isn't Randy. This is... I looked at the room, and the dog, and the core, and the door, and the decades, and thought about names. This is Caleb Rivers. The mountain's listening. We are too. Move now. Coda barked once. The disc throbbed once more. And the mountain, polite, gave us another tremor like a nod. We had woken an old ear. Now we had to prove it wasn't deaf faith. The clock in my head began to count. 22 minutes, we ran. The nav room didn't feel like a room anymore. It felt like a rib cage, and we were inside it, listening to the heart remember how to beat. Around the circular disc, the indicator jewels went from sleepy amber to stubborn green. The hollow center, newly seeded with the core, stayed the color of cold steel, but the sound had changed. The mountain's voice was no longer a rumor. It had pitch. It had intent. Wind shifts 37, Blackwater rising. Ridge ice fractures propagate east. 23 minutes, the speaker said in my father's tone, as if the mountain had borrowed his mouth. All right, I breathed, as if I was talking to a living thing because I was. Coda stood with his chest square to the door, ears lifted, listening in two directions at once, to me and to whatever moved beyond the walls. His tail was still, his breath tidy. A working dog's body holds the answer before the question is even formed. I moved to the console bank. The uplink line glowed a stubborn yellow, alive but short of honest. A hand-lettered strip of tape under a toggle read hollow relay. I flipped it. The disc purred, then choked. A red lamp popped on under blind. We had the ears. We didn't have the eyes. Come on, I said to the wall. Show me. The mimic panel beside the disc displayed the network like a child's drawing of rain. A dozen channels, most dead, one pulsing. A faded schematic taped to the metal showed a relay chain stepping uphill to something called North Slope Shack. A smaller note, nearly erased where greasy fingers had run for years, said Postmaster Key. I touched the pocket where the ugly, hand-filed key warmed my chest. The phone on the wall was the last stubborn piece of a language nobody spoke anymore. But the comm manifold might still feed into the valley if I could wake the relay. I traced the cable bundle from the hollow, relay toggle to a rusted conduit marked Shaft B. Coda nosed my knee. The speakers ticked, then offered another measured sentence in my father's voice. Ice shear at mile 2, water gaining speed 21 minutes. We're going to need the shack, I told Coda. And we're going to need it working. He didn't have to like it, he had to understand. He did. I looped my line bag over a shoulder, pocketed a grease pencil, took 3 fuses from a tray marked "Don't Trust Them," and shouldered a portable inverter. The field battery read 10.9 devi. The lightning farm would carry the rest if the wires didn't crumble in my hands. The Shaft B hatch was stubborn but fair. The hinges groaned like old knees as I levered it. Cold came up the ladder in a clean sheet, smelling of iron and pine, like a winter that had been bottled and put away. We climbed. The ladder ran through a narrow throat where old tar had tried to keep the weather out and mostly won. We broke into a short, horizontal tunnel, and then into a chamber with a square of daylight spearing down from a vent, shaft capped with a steel grate feathered in snow. It was not blue outside, it was the white that comes before a storm commits. The chamber held a relay rack, 2 battered cabinets with their faces off, a spine of ceramic insulators, a manual throw bar, and a hand-cranked generator bolted to the floor. On the wall, in a carpenter's steady hand, someone had chalked, "Power first, signal second, hope last." I smiled despite the clock chewing minutes off my day. "You old mules," I said to the engineers who had taught themselves how to pray in circuit diagrams. The throw bar was frozen. I warmed it with my hands, then with my breath, then with a curse that came out like steam. It moved a 1/4 inch, then a half. Coda watched the duct of light. Snow dust sifted into the beam like a swarm of small, indecisive things. The hand crank's leather grip was stiff but intact. I set my boots, picked a rhythm, and turned. The needle on a wafer-thin voltmeter groaned, nodded, and then got interested. At 11 volts, I locked the crank and slammed the throw bar home. Uplink went from yellow to green on the local panel. The conduit leading back to the nav room vibrated like a pipe with song in it. I could feel the hollow disc below us draw breath like a lung that had been given permission to live. "Lowtown, post 23 again," I said into my field radio patched into the line. "This is not a drill. Blackwater will breach banks at the culvert behind the diner in approximately 20 minutes. Move the kids, move the cars, and close the bridge." A voice came back, layered with doubt and the kind of authority that's used to managing nonsense. You gotta identify yourself. "Caleb Rivers, former Signal Corps. I'm in the Post 23 listening facility. The mountain's speaking, we just gave it a mouth again." Silence. Then the woman from before, no longer teasing, "If this is a joke, it's a career ender. If it's not, it's just, where the hell is Post 23? Under your feet. Now move." The channel died. It didn't die the way angry people hang up. It died the way people run. Coda looked up the shaft and then at me. We both heard it. The first true tremor, not the gentle old beats of deep rock, but the low rip a river makes when it puts a shoulder against its banks. 18 minutes, the speaker said from below. My father's voice isn't supposed to be a metronome. I let it be one anyway. We moved back down into the nav room. The disc sat there like a still lake lit from underneath. With uplink now green, the blind lamp on the console flickered and went dark. The hollow wasn't blind anymore. I flipped the hollow relay toggle again. The circular map face animated in a way I've only ever seen in dreams. No picture, just motion in light. A little chain of nodes blinked along the Blackwater drainage, each pulse out of time with the last, together forming a stuttering chord that meant speed. On the disc rim, a IE minute scale crept forward. 1742, 1741. "All right," I said to Coda, and to the men whose names were now ghosts on the walls. "We're doing this." I routed a second line to Ranger Net, a third to School Bus, and a fourth to Weather K, all labeled in languages that only work well under pressure. I spoke fast. I told them what the disc told me, where to move, what to carry, which hill not to trust, which bridge had lies baked into it. The radio made me a stranger in a dozen ears. That is its magic. It makes you not a stranger for long. In the listening gallery, one of the bay lamps flared and stayed hot. Lowtown. I jogged past the glass and pressed my palm to it. Behind the pane there was no picture, but I could almost feel the air move over little microphones embedded in the platforms, a weather of voices. The mountain's vowels had acquired consonants, human ones, Doors, shouts, the quick cry of a chair scraped across linoleum. A bell someone still rang with a rope. 15 minutes, the speaker said calmly. My father never raised his voice when anything important was happening. He only got very, very clear. I returned to the comm manifold and looked at the last stubborn lamp. Repeater. End slope shack. It glowed a sickly yellow, flickering like a pulse under a bruise. This is where the key comes in, I said to Coda. He thumped his tail once, the field hand's version of yes, sir. Shaft B had been kinder than I expected. Shaft A might not be. I loaded the pack again. 2 flares, 1 coil of copper, 4 wire nuts, the postmaster key, and a sandwich that had become a rumor of bread. We took the ladder past the relay chamber and kept going until the tunnel kinked toward the north slope. The hatch at the top of Shaft A was closed with a padlock that could have been a small country in another life. The postmaster key slipped into the keyway and sulked. I jiggled it, swore at it, remembered my father's habit of tapping the bow twice, left-right, like a code you teach a door. I did it. The lock turned. Light hit us like surprise. The wind was awake, no longer deciding what kind of day it wanted to be. It had chosen urgent. The North Slope shack was 30 yards off the hatch, a little wood and tin rectangle crouched into the drift like a fox that had been around long enough to know when to make itself small. An old whip antenna angled from the roof, guy wires singing a thin, taut note across the slope. We hustled. Coda broke trail, plunging chest deep, then springing up and forward in a rhythm I could have set a heart to. The shack door stuck, then gave. Inside it smelled of cold paper, radio dust, mouse. A workbench backed into a window where the world was a flat white sheet, except for a black scar where Blackwater lay. On the bench sat a transmitter the size of a suitcase and a patch panel bristling with jacks. A penciled card taped above it showed a neat flow: hollow, relay, shack, town, ranger, bus, weather. One cable lay blackened, its jacket chewed, copper green as old pennies. There was our flicker. I cut out the bad section, stripped the ends with a pocket blade, twisted in the spare run of copper, and sealed the splice with tape I warmed in my hands. The repeater lamp on the panel steadied. In the valley below, something flashed, a line of cars moving where cars shouldn't, or maybe should now. 13 minutes, my father said through the little shack speaker, because the shack was on the same network, because the mountain is one body if you wire it that way. Copy, I told him. And just for once in my life, it didn't feel crazy to answer a voice that should not, by any ordinary rules, still exist. Coda stood up with his forepaws on the windowsill, watching the white plane for movement. His breath fogged the glass in small, disciplined exhalations. Across the plain, a dark smudge lengthened where Blackwater shrugged in its bed. Wind harried the surface into scales. Ahead of the surge, the ice at the culvert behind the diner cracked in a line a man could stand in and be nobody in an hour. I leaned into the transmitter. All Lowtown traffic. If you're on Blackwater Road, you're moving away from the diner now. Bridge is a bad thought. Take Ridge Road east and cut behind the mill. Rangers, knock on doors. Bus 1. You're collecting from the church lot as of... The clock on the panel ticked a reluctant minute off the table. 12. Coda whined. He didn't do that like other dogs. He only did it when his body knew something his mouth couldn't show. He stared at the culvert. The culvert let go. It didn't explode. It exhaled, taking 6 feet of ice into itself like a man drinks from a glass he'd been given by the sea. The surge leapt. A truck parked stupidly near the diner became a lesson as water lifted it and taught it how to swim. 11 minutes, the speaker said. It meant, you have that long before the ridge fractures reach the place people think is safe. I keyed the line to Weather K. Say it out loud, I told the operator. Siren, code flood, all channels. Give them a sound to put their feet into. A second later, a siren shaped the air. It was an old one, the kind you wind with a handle, the kind that has to be held up by someone whose arms get tired. But it was enough. Doors opened, people moved. The sound taught them how. Coda's ears flicked toward town, then back to me. Half of his job was keeping me from trying to be everywhere at once. We're good, I told him, which was not the same as true. We're better. We blew back down the slope into the hatch, the postmaster key burning a shape into my chest through cloth, back into the stomach of the mountain, back to the disk. The blind lamp slept. Uplink held. The little green jewels around the rim pulsed in a rhythm that felt more like a pulse than a power light. The listening bays sang their tone. The gallery didn't feel like a museum anymore. It felt like a switch. Ridge shear at mile 3. 9 minutes, my father said. I touched the disc's rim and looked at the names of the men cut into the lime of the wall, revealed as the old ink breathed away. Names without plaques. Names that were fine with that. We're with you, I said to them and to the mountain, because sometimes the pronoun is the whole work. Coda left the doorway and came to my side, pressed his shoulder into my leg. The nav room breathed. The town moved. The siren wrote a line across the air that even the river had to read, and the hollow map, no longer blind, stared right back at the storm and refused to blink. The siren still wrote its thin silver line across the valley when the mountain exhaled again, softer this time, as if pleased someone had finally listened. Down here, the nav room glowed like a low fire. The blind lamp slept. Uplink held. The disk's pulse matched the rhythm in Coda's ribs. Ridge shear passes mile 3. Water distributes east. 8 minutes, my father's voice said, calm as he was the day he taught me to splice a field line with my teeth and 2 inches of tape. I pressed the transmit and gave the Rangers a last route change, then let go, let them run their end of the story. The mountain would keep speaking. Our job for the next breath was to give it back its history. Postmaster, I said to Coda, tapping the pocket where the long key warmed my chest. He understood the tone more than the word. He nosed the corridor and moved, a shadow with 4 clean arguments for forward. We returned to the postal Debachescom alcove. The shaft of pigeonholes rose like an organ's pipes. Mouse nests, graphite smears, oil ghosts, all the perfumed, honest rot of work left in place. I set the lantern on the waist-high table. Its flame laid warm on cold steel. Let's see who tried to speak, I said. The first cylinder came free with a metal sigh, U-23 stamped deep. The cap surrendered to a careful twist. Inside, onion skin paper and a smell that will always be 1952, carbon, tea, wool. The handwriting slanted like a man who walked faster than his thoughts trying to keep up. To whom it concerns at the weather desk, the listening network will give you 20 minutes, but not if you order us dark. You asked for maps, we built ears. The mountain will not be shamed on your timetable. Emsha Rivers, field lead, post 23. I set it aside. The second tube held a grocery list on the back of an equipment manifest, potatoes, tallow, batteries, dog biscuits, and a doodle of a shepherd with a neat nick in its left ear. Coda looked up when I laughed and thumped his tail, embarrassed to be caught being loved from a time that wasn't his. The third contained a ledger page from the North Slope shack. Dates, initials, parcels. The last entry had been underlined twice. Old mail, hold, await field lead. No signature, just a pencil dent hard enough to bruise paper. Somebody had waited and no one had come. The fourth tube was welded with corrosion. I pried the cap with a knife and a prayer. The cylinder cracked, then loosened, spitting out a bundle of letters tied with a shoelace. My hands didn't shake until I saw the first name, Elena Rivers, my mother's. The ink bled at the edges where winter hands had sweated through hope. The top letter read like a telegram and a lullaby got married in a cold room. E. They told me to seal it. If we do, the map will go deaf. If we don't, we go deaf to orders. I have chosen not to seal. If I've done wrong, I will carry it alone. If I've done right, the town will never know me. I have hidden the core when we're not on it. And I have taught the men to write on the walls with ink that listens to heat. If you come here one day, press your hand to the black. It will breathe. Tell Caleb, if he is old enough, that a hollow is not an absence. It is a promise. M. A little place in my chest, cold, since hospital tiles and quiet machines, warmed like a coal remembered where a match had been. I put the bundle back carefully and slid it into my inner pocket where heartbeat and secrets belong. The letters were late, but they were right on time. Coda gruffed low. Not a warning. A question. His nose tracked the bottom pigeonholes, then the back corner of the alcove where plaster separated from concrete in a hairline grin. I pressed. The panel shifted with the intimacy of something built to move only for hands that loved it. Behind the panel, an elevator drawer, not for people, for mail. A cable looped over a pulley, counterweight rusted into place, stenciled on the steel lip in ghost letters. Up, postmaster. Down, T3, locker. Old mail, I said. The drawer would not budge with arm and back. It would, however, respond to a dog. I slipped the sling of my line through the handle, tied a bowline Coda could pull without biting, and tapped his chest. He rocked back, legs square, leaning his whole honest weight into the world. The counterweight argued, insulted our parentage, and then moved. The drawer groaned up a foot, 2, 3, until the postmaster locker cleared the lip. The locker was a wooden crate bound in tin, its face scarred by stamps and years and a coffee mug. I cut the wire and lifted the lid. Old mail looked like a town's heartbeat laid flat. Letters with ribbons, postcards cut from cereal boxes, a child's drawing addressed to the men in the mountain. At the bottom, wrapped in oiled canvas, a sealed envelope with a wax stamp I knew like my own hands. My father's signet, a ring he kept in a tobacco tin and only wore when he had to pretend to be important. On the outside, in block letters meant to be read by anyone if it had to be, in the event of my absence. Okay, I said, which is what you say to a mountain when you can't say please. The seal cracked. Inside were 3 things: a map, hand-drawn and clean, with T1, T2, T3 annotated, and a 4th line in red pencil, T3B, Deep Gallery. A short reel of magnetic tape labeled Brief Countdown, and a note written in the quick, angled hand of a man with bigger work than paper can hold. If you're reading this, I either trust you or I'm dead. We learned the mountain breathes on a rhythm. The breath count tells you when the ice lungs collapse. If you attach the reel to the gallery amplifier, the disc will translate the count to minutes. The last time it saved us 23. If the orders come to blind the map, remember, the order of duty is people, ground, paper, in that order. If you reverse it, you'll have good paperwork. And bad ground Emscher Rivers. On the back, 3 words and 1 drawing. Coda's ear and a little triangle with circles, an antenna diagram. My father had named every dog, long before this one, some version of Coda, Coda, Kona, endings that knew they were beginnings. I put the tape in my pack, the map in my shirt, the note where grief could warm it. We muscled the drawer down to T3, the sounder end of the world where the Black River had taught me the temperature of my bones. There, above the lightning junction, another amplifier box sat, quiet as a closed book. Its faceplate took the breath countdown reel with the sanitation of a machine designed by thoughtful hands. I seated it and cranked the lever to lock. Back in the nav room, the disc waited like a lake that knew dawn. I fitted the patch cable from deep gallery to the console, then made the Lightning Farms stone fuse sing again with a short crank on the relay. The panel took the power, tasted it, and smiled. Coda settled with his chin on his paws, eyes following me in the way a partner watches the next step of a dance he already knows the song for. Counting breaths, I said, and threw the switch. The disc's rim lights shifted tempo. Instead of a clean sweep, they pulsed in thick clusters like jellyfish deciding the sea. Numbers on a thin enamel clock face slid 0756, 0755. My father's voice, no longer just borrowed but partnered, came through the speaker with a warmth I recognized not as technology but as a thing that happens when a room's work is aligned with a life's. Deep gallery active, breath count set, 7 minutes, 52 seconds. Outside, the siren stuttered and caught again, brave and human. Through the listening gallery glass, I felt something new in the air, a storm of voices signed to the mountain. Get in, move, baby, Ruthie, your coat. Bridge is shut. Behind the mill, behind the mill. The phone line crackled to life on its own. Post 23, this is Lowtown, we're moving. The diner's empty. We can't get old Hank out of the sauce shop. He says the river doesn't tell him what to do. Tell him I do, I said without meaning to. There was a pause. A short laugh. Exhausted. Copy. He always did listen to a map. 3 minutes to Culvert Surge, too, I said. He moves now, or he becomes a statistic my mother would slap me for. The voice came back half under her breath. You got it, Mr. Rivers. I wanted to ask her name, because naming people is the work of making them real, and I needed the world real just then. There wasn't time. She left the channel not with doubt, but with footsteps. Coda rose and came to my side. He leaned solid into me, that pressure he uses to say, I am a fact. I put my hand on his head and let fact travel up my arm. The clock ran down. 02:19. 02:18. Ridge shear at mile 4, 2 minutes E, my father said, voice like a hand on a shoulder. Wind shifts 40. You were right, I said to the air and the dog and the men in the lime of the wall. Not a weapon, a listener. The blind lamp flickered once, as if remembering the order, then stayed dark out of respect. The disc's pulse slowed in places and sped in others, townspeople crossing rooms, crossing streets, pulling hands, opening doors, becoming the picture in light the room could never show in image. I pulled one more letter from the old mail crate before we sealed it again, a postcard drawn by a small hand in blue crayon. It showed a mountain with a big ear and a tiny town saying hello. The back read, Dear men in the mountain, please tell us when the snow is mad. Mom says you can hear. Ruthie. The stamp had never been canceled. I set it on the console, a small holy thing, and Coda sniffed it once like a blessing. 041. 40. The valley exhaled. The sound of a wave you can't see arriving right on time. Somewhere above us, a truck door slammed, a padlock clanged, a door shut, then opened again because someone remembered a cat. Then the disc's rim light steadied. The breath count climbed back out of the red into a slow, healthy rhythm. The speaker gave me a sentence that felt like a promise being kept. Blackwater surge past Maine, primary impact avoided. I let my lungs remember how to do their older job. Coda did not cheer. He doesn't. He recognizes truth by standing still and being made of it. The phone crackled. The woman came back out of breath and smiling out loud. We did it. You did it, even Hank. He said to tell the men in the mountain that he respectfully declines to drown today. Tell him the mountain appreciates his cooperation, I said. I meant, I love you in the language of work. She snorted. Copy that. Who are you, Post 23? For a moment, the word son crowded every other possible sound. I let it be there without making anyone else hold it. Just a listener, I said. The line clicked soft as a nod. I closed the old mail crate, tied it with clean cord, and marked it with a carpenter's pencil. Delivered, late, not never. Then I slid the panel back and returned the alcove to its quiet. On the way out, I pressed my palm to the strip of heat ink my father had mentioned. The black warmed under skin drank me and receded, revealing a fresh, pale line where our names could go if we dared write them in a place built to remember without bragging. I didn't write yet. Coda licked the inside of my wrist once, light as a signature. We went back to the nav room and listened to the mountain breathe. The breath counter climbed back to a slow, healthy rhythm, then hovered, like a patient who was stable but watching the door. The siren in Lowtown wound down to a tremulous afternote, a tired voice saying, "We did it, for now." In the nav room, the blind lamp slept. Uplink held steady, and yet the disc kept whispering little asymmetries at its rim, glints that didn't belong to flood water or wind. The schematic for my father's envelope waited on the console, corners curled by the lantern's heat. T3B, Deep Gallery, was penciled as a thin red vein, departing the main T3 conduit and diving under the Blackwater Channel into a hand-labeled void, Lightning Trench. Under it, in smaller letters, he'd written, "Stone fuse, service when the breath stutters." It was stuttering. Coda stood stretched and leaned his shoulder into my leg as if to say, "You're going to argue with yourself and lose? Let's go." I checked the pack. Copper leads, a roll of rubber tape, wire brush, 2 porcelain standoffs, fuses the color of old teeth, shortwave flares, a coil of rope, and a handful of biscuit Coda pretended not to notice. The field inverter read 10.6 Ver. The rest we'd beg from the buried sky. We marked the disc, T3B, Caleb and Coda, 1412, then took the corridor past the listening gallery where the black panes hummed with the residue of other people's voices. The air cooled, gravity turned practical, asking for a signature at every step. At the T3 junction, we ducked into the kneeling pipe where the world goes sideways. Stone sweat slicked the concrete. The smell changed. The penny-bitter breath of ozone over wet rock. Somewhere ahead, the mountain grumbled. A deep bell drumbeat 2 rooms over. The pipe dropped us at a node like a stone lung. 2 tunnels yawned. Left toward the black river we already knew, right toward a seam with crystalline bloom and a wind that felt like static touching hair. Someone had chalked a lightning glyph on the right-hand wall, and under it, in a careful engineer script, service, 2 men, 1 dog. I touched the chalk with a knuckle. It took the oil from my skin and grew darker for a second, alive enough to remember. We went right. The lightning trench wasn't a trench in the way a trench is a wound. It was a cleft. a natural rift that someone had coaxed into a machine. Iron rods climbed both walls and offset ladders, their heads linked by copper ribbons now green with time. Between the ladders ran a shallow channel of black water so still it looked like a polished floor. Every 20 feet a stone fuse, a stack of salt-bright limestone cakes and graphite discs, sat bridged between copper shoes. The air snapped against the back of my tongue. "Don't touch anything that wants touching you," I told Coda, and he adopted the tight, prancing gait he used on glass and ice. The first 2 fuse stacks were merely shabby. The third had slumped, its graphite pucks eaten to scallops, its copper lugs furry with corrosion. A bypass wire dangled from a cracked insulator like a bad improvisation. Somebody had kept this alive with hope and curses decades longer than the manual said. The rim lights at the edge of the hollow disc back in the nav room had been pulsing in triplets. Here, the same triplet tempo throbbed up through the floor of my boots. I knelt. The whetstone soaked my knees through without asking permission. Up close, the damage was more than neglect. On the inside face of the fuse shoe, someone had scored the copper deep. 3 diagonal knife marks where a proper line would arced and chewed itself. Sabotage is sloppy when it's scared. This was scared. "Not a storm's work, Simmerer," I said. Coda huffed once the way he says, "Agreed, keep moving." We killed the leg, 1 porcelain switch at a time, until the reader on my pack drifted to 0.3 V. Not dead, but not eager. I braced the fuse shoe with my boot, teased the old graphite out 1 coin at a time, then wire brushed the copper until bright showed through the green like old truth through a lie. My forearms hummed with borrowed thunder. The muscle memory of a younger man soldering in stormlight returned, bringing my father with it. "Clean first, Caleb. Electricity loves honesty more than power." I replaced the stack, graphite limestone, tight and even. When I tightened the clamp, the stack sighed and stopped crying. I checked the insulator, threaded in a new bolt, and taped the bypass into retirement. "Moment of truth," I told the trench, then to Coda. "Head behind me." He did, pressing his chest against my shin so that my bones would remember he was here. I clicked the porcelain back up the line like rosary beads in reverse. The air made a small private snap, the kind a man shouldn't hear if he wants to keep pretending he's in charge. The reader climbed 6.2, 8.7, 11.45. The trench's hum shifted key. Far down the rift, another fuse stack gave a cranky pop like a barn door in winter and then cooperated. We moved to the 4th stack. Its graphite had split. The copper had been scored harder. Knife marks again. A footprint fossilized in salt showed a boot tread, narrow with a pebble lodged in its heel. Human. Recent? No, but not 1952 either. Someone had been down here after the last official breath had been counted. "Who tried to blind you?" I asked the trench. My voice came back as if it had been walking ahead of me and only now decided to wait. This repair took longer. The bolt seized. The shoe wobbled. The channel's water, still as prayer, developed a faint surface tremor, rings spreading from nothing toward us. Coda's ear flicked. He put his nose low to the channel without breaking the plane of water and inhaled, not scenting so much as reading. He backed away and lay down, his version of a brace. "Copy," I said, tightening the last nut. "If it jumps, we ride it." I brought the leg live again. The sound this time was a thrum that lit the cavities of my teeth. The reader peaked 12.3 V and settled to 11.8, like a heartbeat after a sprint. The breath counter back at the disc would see it as steadier light at the rim. We fixed the 5th stack. The 6th sobbed graphite dust and then quieted. The 7th was gone. Where a stack should sit was a hole cut into the limestone shelf, edges scabbed with tar. In its place, a steel box wired into the circuit, its faceplate stamped with a company logo I didn't know, just a clip name, Stern, and 3 false friendly LEDs. I touched nothing. I looked. Copper ran from the box not back to the trench grid, but into a separate conduit that bored away up and east toward the ridge above the mill. The box wasn't a fuse. It was a siphon. Sabotage wasn't just a knife at the copper, it was a mouth at the line. "Someone stealing the sky," I said. My voice sounded like a man talking in his sleep. Coda didn't growl. He did something worse. He went very still, the kind of stillness that dogs offer when the prey is too big for teeth and patience might be the only tool. His gaze tracked the extra conduit until it vanished into stone. I pulled the wire brush across the box face, bringing dull steel to a fragile shine. The LEDs were dark, but their little plastic domes caught our light-like eyes. A narrow label under the screws read, "Fault-triggered bypass. Do not remove under load." Another hand scratched, "If this sparks, you're fed." I ran the math that men run when they choose between truths. Kill the siphon and risk arcing the whole trench during a storm. Leave it and bleed power from the disk at the very moment we needed it to see. "We take it," I said, deciding the way a foot decides which rock will hold, but gently. We killed half the line, every other leg, to starve the box without dropping the trench into silence. Voltage sank, complaining. I slid a split wrench under the first lug and tightened until the screw twitched and I felt the old cold through the handle. No spark. The second came slow. The third came hard, then surrendered. The box loosened, then lifted. I hunched it against my chest and felt its secret weight, more than steel. Inside, batteries, a parasite with a stomach. When I broke the last lug free, a blue-white tongue of arc licked the air between shoe and box. It wasn't big. It was eager. I let the box go and it slammed to the stone and skittered into the black water with the sound of sin. The channel hissed like a snake that had decided to be steam. A smell like pennies burned and gone filled my mouth. "Down," I said, and Coda was already under my hands, his body a wall. The arc died hungry. The trench took a breath like a sob you don't let strangers hear, and then settled into a stern, even hum. My reader climbed as if the numbers had been held down and just remembered how to float. 9.8, 10.9, 12.0, 12.1. Somewhere behind us, deep in the nav room's memory, a green lamp that had been sulking found its reason and stayed lit. The disc would see us now the way a town sees its own smoke and decides to put a bucket line in the street. We restored the legs one by one. The channel smoothed. The hum climbed half a note. I took the extra conduit in my hand and found it warm. Not with electricity, but with recency. Whoever installed the siphon had not done it in 1952. They'd done it in a world where that logo had invoices and a website. "We're not alone in our century," I said. Coda sneezed once. Dust, salt, acknowledgement, and flicked his ear. We followed the conduit 30 feet until it vanished into a plated wall panel stamped T2 access. Welds fresh compared to the old seams, slag beads still proud. Whoever closed this had a portable rig and a budget and time. I pressed my palm against the plate, not to open it, to memorize it the way a man memorizes a face he might have to testify about. Then we went back the way we'd come, As we crawled, my radio clicked alive with a voice already moving, the woman from Lowtown. Post 23, we've got folks at the mill loading onto the grain trucks. Bridge is holding for now. That siren failed on the ridge, but Mary from the diner is banging a skillet in circles, and honestly, it's working. Tell Mary to keep conducting, I said, and felt my mouth smiling in a room that had taught my jaw to forget that shape. Copy. Also, whoever you are, thank you. She didn't wait for permission to feel it, then softer. We've got time to breathe. Make good with it, I said. Back at the node, I paused and looked down the other throat, the one toward the Black River. A fine mist lifted off the water, not warm, not cold, ionized. The trench had gone from patient to instrument again. We had our headlamp. We reached the nav room at a trot that still respected the ceiling. The disc now pulsed even. The network active partial plate had gained a second line. Lightning, stable. The repeater, end slope. Shack Jewel burned a quiet, satisfied green. More surprising, 3 new tiny lights on the far rim, T1, T2, T4, which had been ashamed of themselves before, now twinkled as if clearing their throats. The sabotage we'd ripped out had not just stolen power, it had isolated the hollow from its brothers. With the trench steady, the family wanted to speak. I laid the siphon's label on the console, copper stink still in it. Stern stared up like a dare. Coda sniffed it, then looked toward the listening bays as if corporate names were just another kind of weather. The speaker gave me a sentence that took the weight out of my knees. Primary surge past, residual flows, diminishing. Window open to service other routes. Copy, I said to my father's voice. To the mountain, to the men who had put their names in lime and then put their hands back to work. We'll take T2 next. Coda laid his chin on my knee, his signature on the plan. Before we moved, I did one small, stubborn thing. I took the carpenter's pencil from the bench and wrote above the A-line lever on the nav console, small enough that only someone who loved the room would see it. Electricity loves honesty more than power. MR under it, in smaller letters, I added, and so do people. CR Coda touched the back of my hand with his nose. Sign it for both of us. I laughed and drew a small triangle with circles, the dog-ear diagram my father had sketched, and wrote Coda under it. The disc's rim flickered in what I chose to believe was approval. The mountain had its breath back. The trench had its heart back. The town had a head start. Now the deeper work began, finding who had tried to make the map deaf and why. We packed the tools. We shouldered the rope, we turned toward T2 and the welded plate with a fresh hand on it and a brand new kind of anger in our pockets. An anger that isn't heat but clarity. Coda rose, tail low, eyes bright, yes. And the hollow map, no longer alone, glowed like a patient waking to the stubborn fact of morning. When the storm hit, we thought it was just weather. But something woke up beneath the ice, something that remembers us. The map wasn't showing where to go. It was warning us what's coming. To be continued. The hollow map. Part 2. When the echoes turn into voices.